So tonight we're going to talk about night moves. We're going to discover a little bit more about the mysteries around fall migration in particular. So I know a lot of you have probably been out and about as we can now a little bit more to enjoy some of the changes that we're seeing this year with the fall colors. So I'm curious from all of you, what are the things that kind of trigger that feeling in you that summer is over and fall is on its way? For me, there's a shift in the landscape. In my backyard, I've been watching some of the young birds start to fledge, get their feathers and get their voices, learn how to feed themselves. It's often considered a quiet time of year as birds start to leave the nest and learn how to survive on their own. And the colors in the landscape shift, and we have gentle cues that come in and tell us that winter is on its way. And I'm seeing here from the chat box, a couple people are like, birds are hyperactive. Oh my gosh, Sharon, I'm so glad you noticed that because we're going to talk about that tonight. Geese flying south, right? That's a huge sign. It's also an audio cue that things are different. Hummingbirds leave right on time, right? They've disappeared from our backyard. We're seeing turkeys and things maybe that we haven't had glimpses of. So tonight, what I really want to do is give you some different things to keep in mind as we move through the fall, to learn to look a bit deeper, even listen a bit more carefully, so we can still make these connections with some of our feathered friends. This is one of my favorite poems that really kind of captures fall, and I'd love to read it to you. And all about the hills are crowned with woods that seem to burn and glow, and purple asters from the ground look up and watch the armies go. Long swaying ranks of swallows strong, and bobolinks alert and gay, and warblers full of life and song, all moving swiftly on their way. And silently among the trees, the thrushes flock and disappear. We hear their notes upon the breeze, and then the singers are not here. The autumn wanes and kinglets go, sweet-voiced and nightly in their way, and all the birds our summers know, they flock and leave us day by day. So that's a poem by Frank H. Sweet from The Flocking of the Birds. And I think it's kind of bittersweet sometimes when we get to fall, especially for us birders, right? Like we're so excited when spring migration comes, and there's that joy as we move through the summer season when we see fledglings hatch, and now everything becomes a bit quieter. But I want to challenge you to still think about how we can continue to connect with the landscape through birds. And so fall birding is a little bit different. I think it's much calmer, it's a little bit more subtle, but there are still things throughout the fall season that kind of come and go that we can take advantage of. And we're going to talk about that tonight. One of the first things that I notice is the change in the soundscape. And Scott Weidensaul talks about this in a really great book. It's called Living on the Wind. It's a wonderful, very dense book on both spring and fall migration. So it's really quite a wonderful piece. So he says, if it is spring or fall, the great pivot points of year, then the continents are swarming with billions of traveling birds. A flood so great that even the most ignorant and unobservant notice, if nothing else, the skeins of geese and the flocks of robins. Now, I'm sure if we all train ourselves to listen a little bit more closely, we might even enjoy some of the other sounds that are on the landscape. So I'm just going to play something for you here. This is actually from the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail. That's what the picture is. And this is a little audio clip that I took last year from that spot. So we can hear the geese starting to come through, and I'm hoping that you can hear some of those small chips and calls that are in the background as well. There's a little chickadee kind of going through a really quick dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. So this time of year, rather than song vocalizations that birds are using to create their territories and to find a mate, What's really starting to happen is birds are using other parts of their vocalization repertoire, including calls. And we have a bunch of different ways that birds use calls to communicate with one another. We have alarm calls that are really intense and loud. You can kind of feel the intensity in them, and you know that something else is going on out there, whether it's a aerial predator coming in or maybe a predator from down below. We have the begging and feeding calls of fledglings that we hear a lot during the summertime. You know, it's kind of like really intense kind of consistent sounds that then pause as that baby is being fed. And then during this time of year and throughout the rest of the year, we have contact calls. So these are little chip notes, little chips or sips or cheeps or chups that we hear from birds that are foraging on the landscape and moving across the land, trying to stay in touch with one another. And those are one of the things that I really enjoy trying to fine tune my ear to during this time of year. But there's another thing that we can listen for as well that's really super fun, especially with this bird. This is white-throated sparrow. This is one of the birds that's moving through right now. Some of you may have them breeding where you live. I'm up in St. Albans City, and so they tend to breed in the woodlands more, and here in the winter, in the fall, they're starting to come into backyards as they move further south for the winter time. So as I hear their little cheeps and chirps, I also hear something else. So they are actually practicing their mating and territorial song, especially the young birds that are in their first year. So it doesn't sound quite right. If you know white-throated sparrow, they do that poor Sam, peebity, peebity, peebity song. Let's see if I can whistle it. That was pretty bad, so I might be interpreted as a young, immature bird, actually learning how to sing. So for some birds, parts of the song is innate. It's something that they're born with. And in other species, scientists are still figuring out which species, they also need to be tutored. So they need to fine-tune their song in order to get it right. So it's really kind of cool to listen to this. So I'm going to play you another little sound snippet here. This is of a juvenile white-throated sparrow. And he doesn't quite have it down yet. The pattern's not there. He doesn't sound super confident. He's even getting a couple notes wrong here and there. So what happens after these guys fledge is from 30 days to about 100 days after they've fledged and they're moving around on their own, they're starting to listen to their neighbors with their snippets of song and fine-tune their own ear so that they can get their song right when they come back next year. So that's a great piece to try to start to listen to, the changing soundscape that's around you, and enjoy some of the finer points of vocalization of different birds. So here we go. I was telling you that white-throated sparrow is going to move through. I may get one or two of them that will stay in my yard for the winter time, but most of them are going to move down to states further south from us. And one of the crazy things that we're still trying to figure out is how birds know when to leave. We may start to see signs of this, like these tree swallows kind of gathered on telephone wires as they're getting ready to group up and migrate and leave. What's cool is each bird kind of has its own cycle that it's flowing through during the year. And this graphic kind of shows some of those things that are starting to happen as we move through the breeding season into the summer. And then August is the time when everything starts to shift and change. A lot of birds, actually some birds are starting to move in August. Other birds are finishing up with breeding, and they're going to go through molting. And then September and October are really the times when they're starting to fatten up. And so we can start to see some of this behavior change. You may have noticed it at your feeders if you're able to have feeders out on places where you don't have bears around, like in my place. But you may have noticed how much birds are feeding. There's a longer period of time that they're feeding. So during this time of year, they're really trying to fatten up so that they can get ready to leave. Now, Sharon mentioned this in the chat box. She said, man, birds seem really restless and really super hyperactive. And there's a word for this. It's a German word. It's Zuckenruhe. And Zug means move, and Unruhe means anxiety. So this is migratory restlessness. It's actually a physiological thing that takes over the bird's body. It actually makes them orient themselves in the direction that they want to go. So spring, they're going to go north. So all of a sudden there's this draw to move northward. And during this time of year, it's that pull to move south. So really cool studies that were done with this crazy funnel called an Emlyn funnel, where they put birds into this funnel and a little ink pad on the bottom, and they projected stars above them. And as they changed how the stars were oriented, the birds actually reoriented themselves. And as they walked through the little stamp pad and tried to fly up and out, they could mark where those birds were moving in orientation with the stars. So birds use a lot of different things to kind of help them make their way, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But the first thing they really got to do is put some pounds on. So most birds need to increase their weight by 50% in order to make some of these flights, and they do so by eating a great deal before migration and at stopover sites. So they are really looking for sugars and fats. And so those come from the landscape, which is really kind of cool. And it's one of the ways that we can help birds out. If you want to think about it this way, that 50% increase in their weight, we can, we could use Big Macs to do this. So if you were a 175-pound human being and you wanted to gain 105 pounds, 60% of that in 2 weeks, you would have to eat 46 Big Macs a day for 14 days in order to put the amount of weight on that a migratory bird has to put on to be successful in their flight. So this is why protecting habitat and conserving land is so very important, especially with native species on the land. So a lot of wonderful work that's coming out right now around not only the need for berries like you're seeing here from dogwoods and viburnums. Keeping jewelweed around is another one. A lot of people cut that back because they consider it something that maybe you don't want in the garden. It's awesome for migrating hummingbirds. So these types of plants are all really important because they provide the energy that birds need in order to make some of these long distance migrations. What I love too about it is if you plant them, so that bird in the upper corner is feeding on Virginia creeper, the catbird there is feeding on a dogwood. It looks like the thrush down below has got a big giant winterberry in its mouth. You can plant these and then you have a better chance of seeing migrants in your yard. So we've done a lot of work at my house to put more viburnums in, and actually I have a pretty good thrush list for living in downtown St. Albans. Anybody have any questions about that before we move on? You could put stuff in the chat box. No, I know. How fast can you type? All right, so we're going to keep going. I will watch and see if there's a question in there. So there's a bunch of different types of migrants that we have to keep in mind, and we can break them into 4 kind of different categories. So we have birds that are permanently here. They're here all year round. Those are our permanent residents. These are the great birds to really get to know. They are your usual suspects, the ones that hang out that you have a great chance of seeing all the time, like black-capped chickadee. These guys are omnivores, so they're really good at being able to take advantage of whatever is available. So most birds that we see that stick around in the wintertime are able to find food. That's the key thing for them. These guys get cold too, and they have strategies to be able to stay warm, but the big thing is, can they find food? All the other types of migrants that we have a little bit more of a challenge in terms of finding food, so they have to move. So we have short distance migrants. We can think of these birds as moving from one type of habitat to another, or from higher elevation to lower elevation. We may even have short distance migrants that move east to west or west to east, depending on where the food is geographically. So Dark-eyed juncos breed up in higher elevations during the summertime, and then they push down into the lowlands, into the Champlain and Connecticut valleys during the fall. I haven't had them show up in my yard yet, but I do have some friends that are starting to see them that are at lower elevations come into their backyards. We have middle distance migrants. These guys may a little bit further from state to state. And they're also responding to food availability. So we have all types of birds that erupt into different places depending on the amount of food that's available. So if you think of things like acorns, I got that picture of the blue jay there. They are mast eaters. So they love berries and nuts and things like that. So when we have a high pop of that type of food, that's where they're going to go. So if we don't have a great cone or seed crop or nut crop in a certain area, those birds are going to push out and find someplace else. Then we have the super long distance migrants, right? These guys are specialists in terms of their food, and most of them are insectivores. So as fall comes in and the cooler temperatures happen, the number of insects drop, and these guys have to go to where there's more plentiful food available for them. So most of these birds are birds like the warblers, some of our shorebirds as well will move on. All right, so I'm noticing in the chat box, Susan has asked, so we can use feeders in the fall, no worries about bears, what's the best food? So my guideline for people in Vermont, and it was really funny because I was online last night with a group from the coast, Rhode Island area. They don't worry about bears where they live, but here in Vermont, we have to worry about bears. So if you are in an area where there are large blocks of contiguous forest, where there's a possibility for bears, we recommend you wait until November, I think it is now. It used to be October 1st, but with climate change, things have shifted a bit. Bears are going to den later. So you want to pay attention to where you live. Where I live, there isn't contiguous forest, and I'm in St. Albans City, which is like fragmented by Route 89. So the chance of bears where I live is very, very low. So I continue to have my feeders up during this time of year. Great question, Susan. Thank you so much. So some of the pathways that birds are starting to follow, I just find this incredibly fascinating. This is a map of the 9 different flyways across the world. And you'll see in the United States, we have 4 different flyways. We have the Pacific America's flyway. We have one right down the center of North America, the Mississippi America's flyway, the Atlantic flyway, and then we have a little bit of the East Atlantic flyway. That's the one that I think is so fascinating, where we can have birds that are from Greenland or birds that are from Alaska showing up in different places and coming through. And so what I love about Vermont is we have all these boreal species of birds that can push down and through where we are. And so when are they moving? Well, this is why we're calling this talk Night Moves. It's because many birds move at night. And so we really want to keep an eye and an ear to the sky. We're going to talk about how to do that next. So what's kind of incredible is nighttime provides a really great benefit to many birds flying. And most of the birds that are flying at night are the long distance migrants. These are the ones that are trying to get to Central and South America, flying out over the Gulf. There's some that even fly out over the Atlantic Ocean and then come back in and zig down into the Caribbean islands. So what nighttime provides them is they provide a little protection from the daytime predators like raptors, but it also is a lot easier on the body. So if you think about a small warbler that has to be able to keep their body aloft, they beat their wings about 20 times a second, which is really incredible. I mean, just try that yourself. You're not going to get there, and your arm, your whole chest muscles are probably going to get really tired really quick. And that's going to heat up your body, right? When we think about how we exercise, our body temperature goes up. So if you're in this constant flight, your body temperature is going to go up. But if you fly at night, you're going to stay cooler. And the moisture that you're producing on your body is going to get wicked off, and you're going to be able to continue for longer distances. It's also a time when the air isn't as turbulent. There's not as much updraft to kind of throw you off course. And so it's a prime time for a lot of birds to be able to move. And it starts to happen about a half an hour after sunset. So one of the great things that we can do is really pay attention to what's happening around us. I put this slide in here. You can see there's a really teeny tiny little speck on there. That's actually an airplane. And one of the first ways that scientists kept track of how many birds were migrating at night was by doing full moon counts. So they would go out on a nice clear night where the winds were coming out of the north, a full moon. You got to have all of this good stuff line up, clear night, good weather, and they would use their binoculars and their scopes to count how many birds passed across the face of the moon. And that was one of the ways that we first got data about birds migrating at night. It is a great thing to try. Our next full moon is actually on Halloween. So if you're not going out trick-or-treating, maybe you step outside in your backyard and look at the face of the moon to see who's moving across. Now, we have advanced quite a bit since the moon watch times, and now we can use weather radar to predict movements of birds and actually see how many birds are moving. There's a wonderful website called Birdcast. It's birdcast.info. You can type that right in. Even if you type in Birdcast, you'll find it. This is sponsored by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and it's a site that uses weather radar to predict and view in real time migration happening. So this is actually from, 2 nights ago now. This is on the 5th of October. And what you're looking at here, that red line, when you go to the website, it's animated and it moves across the screen. And all these little arrows pop up and the colors pop up to show you the direction that birds are moving in and the intensity with which they are taking off from the ground. So the weather radar can actually pick up the signature of birds, and it shows as a different color than rain or any other type of precipitation. So this is a really great thing to go to, especially if you want to know when is a good night to go out and look for birds, or when it's going to be a good morning to go out as the birds come down to rest. So here are some pictures from actually this week. This is what's really great. So the night of October 6th, we are in the blue cool zone, so it wasn't really great for migrating birds, but watch this. As we move through, we had a little bit of precipitation, or we're going to on the night of the 7th, it's predicted. But tomorrow night, it looks like, watch this, I'm going to click, we're going to get a little bit warmer in our zone. So we'll have some birds moving through. So if you're a diehard birder and you like to go out early in the morning and be able to see some of those migrating birds that might be pushing through, Birdcast is a really great tool to use to kind of plan when you want to make that happen and get out there on the land. It's also another great way to know when to go out and listen at night. So earlier I was talking about the changing soundscape, and one of the other ways that birds vocalize is in using those call notes to stay in touch with one another when they're flying at night. So there's all these little chirps and cheeps and sips and sounds that are happening above us. And we can step out on these beautiful and clear nights and listen for that. Now, they're a little bit tougher to identify than a song or a call, and it's really, really hard to get your binoculars on birds at night. But I think what's magical about it is just thinking about those billions of birds that are flying over every night that we have great weather to make it to Central and South America. I mean, it's just, you hear one chip or one chirp and your heart's just going to go, woo! All right, I'm going to play a couple chips and chirps for you. What's really wonderful is there's a group of folks here in Vermont that are actually monitoring nocturnal flight calls of birds. And what they have is a microphone setup that they're putting out on rooftops. I have a couple friends, Larry Clarefeld and Richard Littauer, who both are doing this. And it's a really neat setup. It's a bucket with a microphone in the bottom of it. And basically the bucket provides a funnel to capture the sound and push that sound down toward the microphone. The microphone's attached to a computer, and these guys record the audio. They change it to sonograms or spectrograms so they can visually see the call note as well. And then they sit and use some different software to identify what they're hearing. So I'm going to play a couple of these for you. Crank your volume up. the first one I'm going to play is a common yellowthroat. This is a very small warbler. See, really quick little sip, slurp. Let's listen to that again. So someone other than me identified that. I don't think I would be able to get that from just listening at night, but this one I might. Actually, thrushes sound a lot like their nocturnal flight calls sound a lot like some of the calls that they use in the woodlands during the summer and the fall. So let's play wood thrush. Has a downward buzzy quality to it. All right, I'm going to play you this next one. This one is from the North Branch Nature Center, and they have a bucket on their roof. This is from 2019, and this is just to listen to the little sips and chirps and the mashup of sounds that you might hear if you went out on a clear night. So you have to have quite a good ear. The good thing is that there's software now that helps amateur recorders and professionals be able to identify those. And then the really cool thing is sometimes you get to hear other things on your recordings as well. So in the chat box, let's see who gets this one. And I'm going to tell you, it's not a bird. There we go. Kathy and Grace pretty much went in at the same time. Good job, you guys. Pat, Susan, coyotes. Yes. I know. So I thought that too, Victoria. When I first heard it, I thought it was loons at the beginning. But no, those are coyotes out near the North Branch Nature Center in Montpelier. So give that a try. There's two things that you can take a shot at to experience that nocturnal migration that's happening at night. So you fly all night and then you're going to touch down during the day. And when you touch down during the day, you really want to make sure you pair up with somebody who knows what's going on the landscape. And so one of the things I always pay attention to when I go out birding in the fall, if I want to find some different types of warblers or sparrows, is I pay attention to the chickadees and the titmice. These are our resident birds who serve as the ambassadors to everyone else. And then I need to make sure that I fine tune my eye. So if you know how a chickadee moves or you know how a titmouse moves, when another bird is moving with that mixed flock, you're going to be able to notice the difference in how they move and how they forage. And then you might get a glimpse of some of these guys. Of course, they're going to look a little different, which is why we call, well, I don't anymore. I call them challenging fall warblers. I don't call them confusing fall warblers. So we talked a little bit about molting. So there's a molting that happens for some species twice a year. Some species it's just once. And we also have young birds that are on the landscape for their first year. So they look a lot different than the bright, vibrant plumage that we're familiar with, especially with the male birds. So one of the ways I think that is really good to prep yourself for fall warblers is to pay attention to female fall warblers during the spring and summer, because a lot of times that washed out, more subtle version is what it's going to look like in the fall for these warblers. So these two birds, we have common yellowthroat here, that bandit bird up in the upper left corner, and then we have magnolia warbler, and then their fall version or immature versions below. So just a little bit different. These two are tricky, but they're super fun to look for. Bay-breasted warbler on the left, and blackpoll warbler on the right. They look much different during the fall in their immature plumage. And I think one of the really cool things, all of these birds, all 4 of these birds are moving far, far south. These are long distance migrants. So that common yellowthroat is going to the Caribbean, so is the magnolia warbler. The bay-breasted warbler here with that nice kind of russet brown color is going to Colombia and Venezuela. And then the blackpoll warbler is the superstar. So this is the longest migrant of any warbler, total of 5,000 miles to South America. And they need to double their body mass in order to do that. So this is a bird that breeds here on the mountaintops of Vermont and then is leaving to go to South America, eating a lot of Big Macs on the way. So when we provide great habitat for them, they will pick our yards as a stopover site to refuel as they keep moving through. So it's not just the warblers that are moving. These guys are long distance migrants. Most of these guys are going to be flying at night, but oops, we also have other sets of birds that are moving as well. So in Vermont, we can start to enjoy shorebirds as well during this time of year. This starts to happen as early as August and runs into October. This photo is by Julie Filiberti. She's a birder up here in Franklin County. And when the lake levels and the water levels are low, that's when the mudflats are at their best, and we have a great opportunity to see shorebirds without having to drive to the coast. So in this picture, we have birds like American golden plover and dunlin, that black-bellied plover, that really thick, robust bird right in the middle, and then a variety of different peeps. So these guys are all wonderful birds to get out and look for. Study your shapes, because that'll help a lot. Oh man, I just double-clicked. Sorry, you guys. Or you'll get something like this. You never know what might show up. This is a beautiful American avocet that was up around the Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge. Beautiful, delicate, elegant bird with that upcurved beak, slender neck, long, pale gray legs. So maybe it's warblers in the morning, and then you head to the shorelines later in the day to pick up on some shorebirds. One of the other sets of birds that's going to be moving now that you can enjoy, as long as the water is open, we will get huge amounts of waterfowl moving through. And of course, the sound of Canada geese is the thing that stands out in our brains as one of those true signs of fall. I think one of the other cool phenomenon to watch is how these birds fly. And I really wish when I had taken physics in high school or college that they had used something like this to teach me about, I don't know, air currents and velocity and all those things I just didn't do well with. But that shape of the V is really all about taking advantage and working together in order to reduce the amount of energy that they have to expend. So what's cool is that V formation of birds that we see, whether it's with geese or other types of waterfowl, it reduces the amount of drag on their body by 65%. And that actually boosts the range, the flight time that they're able to be in the air by 71%. So the birds actually position themselves to fly just behind each other and to the side of each other. And they take advantage of the upwash that comes off of the bird's wings. It's kind of like drafting and cycling. And so it's a really cool phenomenon to look for and think about. It's all about saving energy because they have to travel long distances. So waterfowl will travel both during the day and at night. And they need to do both because they actually use landforms or land masses in order to find their way. So flyways for ducks are just a little bit different than other birds. And so we have specific waterfowl flyways that conservationists pay attention to in order to protect the land that these birds are on. This is one of my favorite. Oh my gosh. Okay, so waterfowl, here's what's great about waterfowl. They stay still for the most part, except when they're in flight. So, right, it's not like a warbler that's bouncing around or a sparrow that's coming in and out of shrubs and things and is brown anyways and blends in with everything. Some of these birds are absolutely striking even in their non-breeding plumage. So this is northern pintail. This is one of the first ducks to head south from their breeding ranges in Canada and in the Great Plains. And they are just magnificent to look at. So we have the male on the left and the female on the right. This is one of the birds that we can look for on Lake Champlain and in some of the inland lakes as well. Other birds, sometimes we got to go to the ocean for them. I threw these in here because every once in a while we do get a harlequin duck. That's the one in the upper left corner. This actually, and if you think that bird is beautiful right now, you should look it up in its breeding plumage because it is just amazing. It's absolutely shocking how striking this bird is. The other one is a long-tailed duck. So the harlequin ducks breed in Canada and Greenland. Long-tailed ducks breed in the Arctic, and they winter in the Great Lakes or coastal Northeast. So some of us sometimes take trips to be able to go and see this bird in other places, especially on coastlines. And if we're lucky, maybe one will make a stopover in Lake Champlain or one of our other lakes. Loons also are congregating at this time of year and then flying to coastal areas. And so we see big rafts of them on Lake Champlain. So this is a mix of juvenile birds and adult bird. And there's one adult plumage. You can see that one off on the left. But this is a great phenomenon to look for, especially in October here on Lake Champlain. St. Albans Bay, I've seen upwards of 100 loon together at once. And so they're all kind of feeding in and staging in these areas and then moving on to the coast. And of course, you know about this other showstopper here, right? The snow geese that come down from the Arctic tundra. So they're going to spend their winter along the Atlantic coast, and in their journey south, they are going to be dropping in from along the St. Lawrence Seaway, coming down along Lake Champlain. One of the most popular spots for a number of years was to go to Dead Creek Wildlife Management Area down in Addison. And actually, the hot spot for me now, especially since I'm up in the islands, is to go jump across the islands and head over to the New York side of the lake. And the northern end of Lake Champlain on the New York side gets 20,000 plus birds right along the bays there. So if you're looking for a great day trip, I think it's really worth it to go take the ferry, go across and drive up the western side of Lake Champlain to pick up on some snow geese. All right, I'm going to just take a second and see if I can clear all drawings. There we go. Good. No worries there. So here's another great set of birds to look for. We're kind of coming to the end of migration for this set of birds. So the welcome pane in the neck, that's a little bit easier to handle, again, than those saucy sparrows and warblers that can be a little bit trickier to see, are our migrating raptors. And so these guys have a different strategy. They're going to fly during the day. So the way that they save energy is by using some of the thermals that form during the day. We'll talk about that in just a second, but let's first think about fine-tuning your eye to all those different birds flying overhead. Raptors, one of the best ways to study raptors is to really study their silhouettes. I was really excited the other day. I caught just a glimpse of a broad-winged hawk while I was at Lake Carmi, and I noticed that thicker body, that more barrel-shaped body, broader wings, broader tail, and it just stood out from the accipiters that I'm really used to in my backyard, like Cooper's hawk and sharp-shinned. So studying silhouettes will be really super helpful. And then what you want to do, double click again, is to go out on a day that's warm and clear, and we're getting some slight winds out of the north. And what the hawks do in order to save energy is they use the warming air currents that form along the sides of the Green Mountains in order to take advantage of those. They're called thermals. And so it creates an updraft for the bird. And what the birds do, the raptors find those thermals and they spiral up the thermal until the thermal cools as you get into that higher elevation. And then they drop off the top of that and stream south. So when one bird finds a thermal, other raptors are watching and they're like, oop, that's the spot where we want to be. And what's great is then you have what's called a kettle of birds. And it's just this swirling mass of raptors that are all trying to catch a good wind to be able to make it easier for them to continue flying. So this one's broad-winged hawk. You could tell by that nice tail shape, that barrel-shaped body, wide wings, which looks a little bit different than this one. Long tail, narrow body. That's probably a sharp-shinned hawk or a Cooper's hawk. What I love about hawk watches, the great places to go here in Vermont are Putney Mountain and Mount Philo. There's often birders up there that are doing counts, and they're super, super friendly and will help you learn your silhouettes so that you can enjoy, you can enjoy days like that when you're hawk watching, which is what I really like about it. That's the best position to be in. And then you're looking up at a sky that maybe looks like that. And then you just enjoy what's above you. Let's brag a little bit about the awesome science that's happening here in Vermont before we wrap up. So the Vermont Center for Eco Studies is doing some really amazing work around migrating birds and learning about where they're stopping over and how long their flights are and what types of habitat they need. So these three birds here, if we start in the upper left corner, we've got grasshopper sparrow, upland sandpiper in the middle, and then that blackpoll warbler that I told you about. So science has come a really long way. We're actually able to put little tiny microchips on birds now. So in the upper left corner, if you look, and I'm going to grab a little thing so I can show you where this is. So right here where the tip of the finger is, there's a small, looks like a little plastic nub, and that is actually the microchip. Okay, and what they do is they tether it to the bird's back. Sometimes they can tie it on with a little piece of like dental floss. It's almost like a little backpack for the bird. And what that does is it transmits data to a computer that the biologists can then watch and track where those birds move to and from. So these guys, it's been really incredible to see what VCE has discovered. So with grasshopper sparrows, they don't begin migration in August, as biologists have previously assumed. They actually stay put on the breeding grounds until October, and then they make short, nearly daily migration flights. And all of that came from the little samples of data that they were able to get from these birds. And head down into the Midwest and along the East Coast for the winter. Upland sandpipers, what they found out with this bird is there are sometimes 4 days of nonstop flight, and this one individual stopped at floodplains and the islands of the Amazon River. So this bird is going in a whole different direction before heading on to Argentina and Uruguay. And then there's that superstar, the blackpoll warbler. So the amazing thing about this bird is this is one of the birds that has transoceanic flights where it flies nonstop for 3 days out over the ocean and then comes into Hispaniola and Puerto Rico. And a lot of times those birds are incredibly exhausted and completely beat after such a flight. But just so amazing to think that they can even make that route. So what can we do to help these birds as they're making these amazing, amazing journeys? Really, it's about being a little bit bolder with conservation. So one of the things that we can do is we can document what we're seeing. Well, there are 2 ways that you can do this. You can use eBird. It's an online platform that you can use to keep track of birds that you're seeing. It's great if you like to know what birds are on your birding list. And then iNaturalist is another one. And all of that data is used by scientists in different ways to make conservation decisions. We can minimize disturbances to these birds as they're moving, especially at night. One of the best things that we can do right now at night is turn off any outdoor lights. Turn those motion sensors off and make sure windows where we have big, like I have a big sunroom, I make sure that the shades are drawn at night. Light can really distract birds off of their migratory path and literally kind of pull them out of the sky. We can look at ways to landscape for birds that will provide them with the food that they need for stopovers, keep cats inside, look at how we can protect birds from colliding into windows as well. Creating and maintaining quality habitat for bird, I just mentioned that. And then of course, on a community level, we can do much more as we plan for climate change in terms of resiliency and adapting and making sure that we're keeping habitat intact for a lot of these birds and in turn for ourselves. So I have one more quote to wrap up with for you tonight. I want to thank you all for staying with me, and we definitely are going to have some time for questions afterwards. This is from Sir David Attenborough from The Life of Birds. He says, "Birds were flying from continent to continent long before we were. They reached the coldest place on Earth, Antarctica, long before we did. They can survive in the hottest of deserts. Some can remain on the wing for years at a time. They can girdle the globe. Now we have taken over the earth and the sea and the sky, but with skill and care and knowledge, we can ensure that there is still a place on earth for birds in all their beauty and variety, if we want to, and surely we should." So I want to thank you all again for being here tonight. Feel free to reach out to me anytime you like. You can find me on all these little different social medias. My website's there at Bird Diva, and I'm at birddiva@gmail.com. I would love to hear your stories about migration and migrating birds that you've enjoyed near you as well. So I'm going to unshare my screen and we will open it up for some questions. Feel free to type some questions in the chat box and we'll take what we can. I mentioned jewelweed. Yes, touch me not. A lot of it is gone by right now. What other plants would be good to plant, says Sharon. Okay, so my favorites, and there's a whole bunch of different varieties in both of these different families, they are shrubs. So I would pick dogwoods and viburnums. So when I moved to this place in St. Albans City, I started pulling out the Japanese honeysuckle and putting in red osier dogwood. And that's one of my favorites. There's gray dogwood, there's alternate leaf dogwood. Oh my gosh, there's so many different kinds. So check out dogwoods, that's a really good one. Viburnums, maple leaf viburnum, hobblebush viburnum. There are a number of different viburnums as well. And those two berries, what's really important about those two is they have a high fat content. So there's berries that are more sugar related that give you a good burst of energy, but it's the fat content that we really want to try to provide on the landscape, especially for the fall. All right. Linda says, I had a Blackpool warbler in the back of my barn in Bath, New Hampshire this spring for the first time in 40 years. Is that unusual? So if it was spring, I'm going to say no, because these guys are migrating and anything's possible during migration. Here's what I love. I live in downtown St. Albans, on the outer edge of town, but it's not a place where Blackpool warblers are going to be breeding or very many warblers at all. But during the spring, I pay attention because they move through here. And what's wonderful is Blackpool warblers stage down low in the lowlands before they move up into the mountains to breed. And so places like, the Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge along the Missisquoi River, you can just hear the Blackpools in early May before they move up into higher elevation. It's really pretty amazing. Can I talk about robins in the wintertime, please? Sure, I can. So those guys are actually like that mid to short distance migrant. So the robins that we see during the winter are not our robins, right? So they're robins that are probably from a little bit north, or they might push east-west, right? Again, it's all going to depend on food availability. So when we start to pay attention to weather, how much snow cover there is that would bury food, food sources for them and for other birds, that will cause birds to shift and move. And so will berry and nut and mast crops as well. That'll cause birds to move too. So robins, you will still see in the wintertime. I think you want to look in the lowlands, Champlain Valley, Connecticut River Valley, and we'll still see some of those robins. Mary Ann and Victoria, you guys are on the same wavelength with the robins. Is altitude a big factor for robins? It's more about food availability for the robins. Annette says, you mentioned half an hour after sunset. Does it continue all night, or is there a best time to try to observe? Whenever you can stay awake. So it is going to continue all night long. You can, yeah. So, and the weather, again, is going to affect that. So if clouds come in or the weather shifts and changes, the birds are going to get pushed down. They're not going to want to try to move in that type of weather. Let's see. Are there hawks? Nikki says, are there hawks that spend the winter here? Yes, there are. So not everybody leaves. So we're going to get red tails are going to hang out. The other thing that I like is other hawks move in. So we have rough-legged hawks that tend to show up and be more plentiful in the wintertime. So you got to think there's this whole land mass above us to the north, right? And that's a different forest type. It's a different, all kinds of different habitats. So some of those birds are going to push down into this area, especially depending on food resources. So it doesn't have to stop, right? It doesn't have to end, this excitement with birding. It just shifts with different groups of birds. So I'm going to ask, because I know there are some birders on this here. I can't remember off the top of my head the birds that are on the wing for years. And I believe it's some of the different seabirds. So they go out to sea and we don't see them for a long time. A lot of them, there's one or two species. So I'm going to ask for help from some of the expert birders that I know that are here tonight. Maybe you guys can put in the chat box the ones that are on the wing for years. And if not, shoot me an email at birddiva@gmail.com and I will get you that answer because I need to refresh my memory. Pat says, can I mention winter finches? Yes. So as we get into wintertime, there's this whole other set of birds that's going to come in. These are winter eruptive birds that rely on different seed crops. And when seed crops are not good up north, they push into this area, or berry crops aren't good up north, they push into this area. So birds like red poles, pine siskin, my favorite, the pine grosbeak, which is just this lovely cranberry color, and they love to be on crabapple trees, and you can like walk up right underneath them. They're just so magical. So winter finches, I often post the winter finch report on my Bird Diva Facebook page, so you can find out more about that as we move into the winter time. Sharon says, how does a bird find its way back to the same spot year after year? Actually, it's Norm, because Norm and Sharon are hanging out together. Okay, Norm, you know what? There's that site fidelity thing, right? And so for some birds, it's just, I don't think we totally understand it yet, how they come back to that same area each time. And some birds, right, the young birds, it's like, now you're going to migrate. They haven't ever done it before. And it's just innate. It's part of their DNA, part of their makeup. Other birds are going to follow those land mass cues again to be able to make their way back, which is why it's so important to keep habitats intact. We start, shifting wetlands and developing wetlands in places like that. It makes it really hard for birds to find those stopover spots that they remember from year to year to make their way back. Norm, I would suggest pick up, look, it's right here. I'm like, I have it right here. Here's Scott Weidensall's book, Living on the Wind. So that, that's a big, thick book. That's a good one if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty for migration. Where are all the red-winged blackbirds now, says Susan. They're going south. Those guys form those big, huge flocks. Oh my gosh, this brings us back to the question that somebody had about murmuration before I even started the talk. So blackbirds, starlings, grackles, redwings form these big flocks together, and when they move all in sync with one another, we call those murmurations. Really pretty amazing, all the physics behind that as well. So redwings gone. Kathy says, do all birds have double molting in the fall? No, it's species dependent. And so some birds will molt right after they're done breeding. So I think about cardinals and the bald, weird Frankenstein cardinals I have in my yard toward the end of the summer. And so once they get done with all their fledglings, they molt. That's the best time of year for them. But it's totally species dependent. And you'd have to, if you're interested in a particular species, you definitely have to look that up. When should we expect that migration isomer? Ooh, well, Donald, you're going to have to give me more on that question. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Albatross, there, Pat Folsom coming through. Albatross can be on the wing for long periods. Awesome, super. Do we have chimney sweeps in Vermont? Yes, we do. Not chimney sweeps, but chimney swifts. There we go. We got both of those. Oh, Marianne, that's a really funny typo. Super. So chimney swifts, yes, we do. And they leave toward the end of the summer. There's a great project through Audubon, Vermont. They are trying to find people to monitor chimney swifts in their neighborhoods. This is a bird that traditionally nests in dead trees, but over time, as those were removed from the landscape, the bird adapted to being able to nest in chimneys. This is a bird that is not designed to land and perch on a branch. They cling to the sides of walls. Their nest is clung to the side of an inside of a chimney, or in the case of those that can still find natural habitat, a hollowed out tree. So they're clinging to the inside of that, and they fly around all day. I love it because we have them here in St. Albans, and I found the best place to go look for them is the top of the parking garage. I have not figured out where they are nesting yet, but I've seen upwards of 40 birds flying around over the city during the day. Really pretty amazing. Don, okay, good. When should we expect that migration is over? Okay, so that depends on species. I think we are ending. The trickle for warblers is kind of almost over. We can still go into maybe another week or so. Sparrows are going to keep moving through, and we'll get some different winter species of sparrow, like American tree sparrow, right? It all depends on the species. So hawks are almost done. And then we get into waterfowl, October, November, then water starts to freeze over. Then we can get excited about winter finches. So there's this great seasonality to birding that once you are aware and you key into it, there's a little something during each season to enjoy. All right, I'm gonna go for, I got 2 more questions here. And then I'm gonna kick it to Randall and Elizabeth to wrap up if you need to pitch the next first Wednesday's talk. So Victoria says, here in Shrewsbury, what's your take on any hummers left out there that may still be migrating through from somewhere else? I've replenished and I don't want to take it down until I know for sure. I think for me, it's like the first really super hard frost that takes some of those different wild food sources off the landscape. I tend to pay attention a lot to, I'm going to try to see if I can get my camera to focus again because I'm really super blurry. I tend to pay attention to the jewelweed, actually, and that's gone by right now and is all gone to seed. So there's always a chance, right? So I don't think it's going to do any harm. You're not going to keep any hummers here by keeping it out. John asked, do any birds use magnetic fields for orientation? Yes, there is some thought that birds use magnetic fields for orientation, but we're not totally clear yet. Researchers don't know for sure which birds use just that, or if they use another technique as well, or if it's a mashup of all different kinds of things. Still a lot to learn. Isn't that great? I love it. All right, you guys, thank you so much. It's just about 8:05, and I'm going to kick it back to Randall and Elizabeth. Thank you all so much for coming. Please reach out to me anytime with any questions.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else have any questions?
None in Vermont, as far as I know. I mean, I don't think there are any Confederate monuments to, here in Vermont. So we got that on our side. And I'd say a heck of a lot more. Yeah.
I don't see any more questions coming up. So I want to thank you. That was fantastic. Really interesting.
Well, thank you. And I am thrilled to see my fellow Essex Junction neighbors and friends of my mom and dad's, and my mom and dad are also on here, but I see Gail and I see lots of other folks, and I'm just super grateful for your interest in this subject and for you coming here after, what was for so many of us a very long night last night. So I'm very grateful to you for giving me your time this evening.